Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. Uh, we have majority from India, so I'm going to say good evening. I'm going to say good afternoon to myself because I'm in South Africa. And Chris, I'm going to say good morning to you.
Thank you so much.
So, so guys, I just want to introduce myself. My name is Nina Rappaport, and I'm going to be your host with this webinar this evening, this afternoon, and this morning. And I'm a Shimanli facilitator. So at Shimanli, we are dedicated to fostering holistic development and preparing individuals to excel in this crazy world we live in. This aligns seamlessly with our concept that our speaker, Chris O'Shaughnessy, who is graciously joining us here again to teach us his wisdom. And he'll be discussing the concept of building resilience. Now, resilience is crucial for us to help us experience and accept challenging situations, move through those situations and the difficult emotions associated with it, and to do so with grace, and to move and to actually build the motivation to stay on the path, stay the course, and try again, no matter what life throws at us. But Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, and I think we can all agree it's not so easy to make lemonade when life gives us lemons.
No, sadly it's not. But don't worry, very, very clever people out there have come up with
Yeah,
loads of ways to help.
yeah. That's why it's so important for us to learn these invaluable tools that you're going to share with us today. Chris is going to talk to us about why there's a decline in resilience-based skills among not only us adults, but kids as well. He's going to share resilience, what it actually is, and give us a framework and how to make it useful for us to assess ourselves and to grow from it. And also equip us with practical exercises to build and enhance our resilience for our overall well-being, because our well-being is inextricably linked to hope, motivation, and constant progress. So, in saying all of this, I am going to hand it over to Chris. And Chris, please teach us how to make lemonade.
Oh, that was such a good intro because it is. I love the concept of just we need to make lemonade. Um, it is. It's a good one. So I'm very excited to be able to share with you. I have the privilege of speaking at schools and other institutions, and the subject of resilience is something that has come up just about across the board, whether it's at schools or universities, government agencies, regardless. It comes up all over the place. So we'll take a little time to unpack that now. And I'll start with a little about me because personal experience on resilience, that's something I can vouch for. And so we'll go back to my childhood a little bit just because oh, that's fun. So this is me. This is me as a child. And as you can see, I was adorable. That's my little sister with me. And one of my first sort of memories as I look back when I learned about resilience later on and then studied it a bit, I looked back to my childhood and there were a few core memories that stuck out as far as things that I think instilled a bit of resilience in me. And one of those things that occurred repeatedly was a move. And I grew up as a military brat, and so I moved around quite a bit growing up. When this picture was taken, I was living in the UK, in a very tiny little village in the middle of nowhere. And that's where I started out school. And as you can see, I was a snazzy little dresser. I had hair back then. That's very important to note. It's all gone now, but I had it back then. Just had a very stressful life. And the school that I was at, manners were of the utmost importance. It was a tiny little school. My natural accent is actually a British accent. So take this picture and then picture that small boy sitting in a small classroom, being taught to apologize constantly and how very important it was to be polite, and then enjoying cups of tea. And that was life. And it was really quite good. And I was, as far as I knew, I was just a small English child. But my father worked for the US military. And so shortly after this picture was taken, we moved to the United States. We moved to Las Vegas, Nevada, which is quite different from a small village in England. And I went from a school that had maybe 60 students and a bunch of sheep and was very, very, very focused on manners to a huge 2,500 student American school where I'm at the risk of being too forward, manners were not of the utmost importance in that school. And I remember I was picked on quite a bit because of my accent. I was the only person in the school that had a British accent, so I needed to learn an American one. If you should look at my dress style, this picture may look like it was taken in the 70s. This was actually the 90s. It's just that the 90s did not come to the UK until 2005. And so I dressed behind everyone else in school. I spoke differently. I stood out and I wanted so badly to fit in. And I realized as I look back, that was one of my first instances where I was like, "Oh, that took a fair amount of resilience to get over." Because I did survive. I absolutely did. In fact, I learned a bunch of really valuable skills. I learned to speak in an American accent. I learned to send my A's and my R's really hard. I learned to dress like it was the 90s. I learned to observe the people around me in order to adapt. And in all honesty, I really do think that a fair amount of my adaptability, a fair amount of my observation skills actually came out of that particular difficulty. And so when we talk about resilience, sometimes I think we speak about it as if it's merely just being able to survive, when in all reality, resilience actually can help us thrive in difficulty because difficulty is going to happen. The idea is, how do we apply frameworks so that the difficulties we experience in life actually become benefits? And that does. It takes a fair amount of work, but I think it can be done. And I do believe it's probably more important now than it has been for a while, which is something we always say in sociological fields. We always think that now is the most important. But I do think there's some research to show that this is something we need to focus on more. One particular statistic that I found quite worrying was this. It comes from the U.S. National Alliance on Mental Illness, and it says that 1 in 4 college students is diagnosed with or treated for a mental health condition each year. 8 in 10 students felt overwhelmed, and nearly half felt at times that things were hopeless. Now, again, this study is just in the US, but it is, I think, a big indicator as far as how the US is tied into global education. I think that I'm seeing the same sort of trend in international schools and quite a few other places as well. So the stress that students seem to be feeling at least is more measurable now, and there definitely seems to be a bit of an increase, which means I think we need to work harder on doing something about it. If we're more stressed now, there's more need for resilience. And maybe I want to start a little bit by even just defining what resilience is, because it's one of those terms that we can throw around. We hear a lot. We all kind of know what it means. There's a lot of people who have had scratchy head meetings about it and come up with fantastic definitions. Personally, I actually learned really well through imagery. So let me give you the image for what I think is one of the best examples of resilience. And it is this. I genuinely think the easiest way to conceptualize what we're talking about when we say resilience is quite simply the idea of being able to get back up whenever we stumble. And I think that really is it in simplicity. If you were to picture our life as a big old journey, along that journey, we're going to stumble. Sometimes we're going to get pushed down. Sometimes we're going to trip when we don't know what's going on. There's loads of reasons that life is really not just a smooth walk, not a smooth jog, not a smooth run. There's different terrain that we have to go through at different times. There's different people we have to interact with. Sometimes you get knocked down and it wasn't even intentional. But the reality is, on this journey of life, as we're getting knocked down, the hope is that through resilience, we're able to pull ourselves back up. And I love this picture because toddlers have to be very resilient. Toddlers, I mean, I look at the picture here, there's a toddler who's clearly fallen down on a bike. And I have toddlers in my life, and they want to move at very high speeds, even though they have very little balance. And so on their little path of life, they are falling down constantly, but they do get back up. In fact, they have to, otherwise the sidewalks would be littered with fallen toddlers, and it would be very difficult to move around in life. So obviously, they get back up. And they get back up in a lot of ways. They get back up by helping themselves up. Sometimes they get back up because an adult or someone else helps them up. Sometimes they need to sit there and cry for a little while. But the fact is, they do all get back up. And for me, it's one of the best ways to think about resilience is in its simplest form. Resilience is just our ability to get back up when we stumble on this great big path of life. And there's been a lot that's happened recently that I think has deeply affected our resilient abilities. And even though it's fading into our memory now, and I'm quite glad for that, to be perfectly honest, the pandemic actually did a lot as far as bringing things to the surface when it comes to our need for resilience. One of the things the pandemic did is it made us shift a lot of the ways that we think, and that deeply affected our resilient abilities. So I'll give you an example that is pulled from a book called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kuhlman. And it's a phenomenal book. And he breaks down our style of thought into two ways. Now, there are loads of ways that you could break down our style of thought. For his purposes, he talks about it in terms of speed. And in simple terms, he says we have fast thinking, which is tied to our limbic system, and it's very pattern recognition. Fast thinking is what you use and don't even know you're using. Chairs are my favorite example of this. If you could count the amount of chairs you sat in a day, you would be very impressive because you probably don't remember because it's just a pattern. When you see a chair, the chances are you don't perform a structural integrity check on it because history and a load of patterns have taught you that you can just sit in chairs. They're there for you to sit in, and they probably have been designed to hold you. Unless you've had a series of very tragic chair accidents, you probably just assume chairs are safe to sit in. So that's fast thinking. That's your limbic system at work. Your limbic system looks for patterns and it looks for efficiency. Your intuition, all sorts of things are tied to this kind of thinking. Then we've got slow thinking. And slow thinking is critical analysis. Slow thinking is when we synthesize new ideas. And slow thinking takes a lot more energy. It forces your brain to work harder. And it's less tied to your limbic system, more tied to your prefrontal cortex and your executive function abilities. And because of this, it's reserved for more intensive purposes. You can see this physically, the change that happens if you were walking along with a friend, and you can walk and talk for the most part, but a lot of that is managed by your limbic system. But if your friend suddenly said something that was out of the ordinary or new or what have you, likely, and you see it in movies, you would stop walking. And that stop walking is actually your brain switching gears. Your brain says, look, we've been running on limbic system, and that's fine. But I've just heard something that I'm going to have to shift into critical analysis. And you physically stop walking when your brain does that shift. And so, what makes this interesting as far as resilience is events like the pandemic shifted a whole bunch of things that used to be pattern recognition and forced them into critical analysis. If we take doors, for example, during the pandemic, doors used to be a very pattern recognition type thing. You probably don't know how many doors you go through in a day because they're a pattern you recognize. You know how to operate a door. But in the pandemic, doors switched from being something you could just breeze through to something that required some thought. Doors became change points. At this doorway, am I supposed to put a mask on or take a mask off? Doors became covered in signs about who could enter and where the nearest, hand washing station was. And so doors were suddenly something that we couldn't negotiate just on patterns. Doors became something that required critical analysis. And part of the reason I think that a load of people felt tired as we were coming out of the pandemic was it takes more energy to have to critically analyze things. And so suddenly, loads of stuff that required low energy, like doors, which were simply a pattern, got moved into critical analysis. And at many points in our lives, we experience this shift. And these are the times that we need resilience. These are the times that we need the tools and framework. Because if you stumble and fall, it means that either something has gone wrong with your pattern recognition, or you've come up against something new entirely. and it requires critical analysis. And the more we can streamline that and put frameworks around it, the more efficiently we can do it. Now we're thankfully, recovering from the pandemic. But the reality is there's still a lot of things that are changing very, very quickly in life. And change does force us to move from pattern recognition to critical analysis. And the more that change happens, the more tired we're going to be. And much in the same way that you're far more likely to stumble and trip if you're tired while you're walking, the same thing happens to us mentally. So, there's a load of reason that we need to focus on this. There's also quite a few reasons that our resilience skills have fallen. For me, one of the huge reasons is our use of screens. And it's very important to point out that I'm not anti-screen. I'm a big fan. I love them. I have an iPad right beside me with my notes. I'm talking into a screen. My phone is nearby. I have one on my wrist. Love screens. They're fantastic. However, screens actually can be used as phenomenal numbing devices. And we all do this. And I'm not even saying there's anything particularly wrong with that, except that, like all numbing behaviors, it can be overdone. Screens can numb some very basic pains, and these pains are actually useful to teach us skills. But because young people, especially, have had access to numbing devices from an earlier age, instead of addressing and building skills from those pains, they've just learned to numb them. I'll give you three examples that I think most adults are likely guilty of, but the ramifications for young people are even stronger. And those three pains are boredom, loneliness, and awkwardness. Now, we definitely use our phones to numb boredom. If I'm waiting in a queue for any amount of time, I'm almost certainly going to be on my phone. I can play a little game. I can read a news story. I can check up on social media. We never have to be bored now. We can doom scroll to our day's content. We have managed to completely numb boredom. The danger is for young people, boredom is actually a great teaching skill. Boredom teaches you creativity, and boredom does register to us as a pain. As a very quick side note, my background is in sociology, and sociologists seem to constantly want to run experiments where we electrocute people. I have no idea why. It just seems to be the sociologist thing to do. And they were running an experiment at a university where they were trying to quantify pain. So they would hook someone up to an electrode, shock them, and then say, how much money would you pay to not feel that again? And as they're running this experiment, they got behind. They were running multiple test subjects, and they left people alone in a room while they attended to other things. And every now and then they would hear the shock go off and think, oh my gosh, we've accidentally shocked someone. And they would run in and they would find that a participant did it themselves. And so they changed the whole experiment. And what they found, and this was in a very limited test subject, this was college students, but still, no wider ages were harmed in this experiment. What they found was that 67% of the college students taking part in this study would rather feel pain than feel boredom. That at about the 20-minute mark of being stuck in a room with no stimulation, no phone, no nothing, just being bored for 20 minutes, 67% of participants would rather shock themselves than be bored. Boredom definitely registers to us as pain, and so we use phones to numb it. But as we're younger, when we didn't have phones, that actually forced us to be creative. We built skills to deal with that pain, very, very core foundational skills. Loneliness, the same thing. Loneliness is a pain. We don't like it. We're not built for it. And it teaches us to build interdependent, healthy relationships to stop that pain. But if we just numb it with a screen, we're not helping that important skill set. Awkwardness, the same thing. If you were at a party where everybody else was talking and you felt left out, that's a very awkward feeling. And I guarantee you, in fact, you probably felt the itch as I said that scenario to reach for your phone because a phone saves you from awkwardness. Because if everybody else is talking and you're not, if you're on your phone, at least they can glance over at you and say, "Oh, it's fine. They have friends. Look, they're on their phone." And so phones save us from awkwardness, but that pain of awkwardness without a numbing device would teach us social skills. The pain of loneliness without a numbing device would teach us interdependent relationships. The pain of boredom without a numbing device will teach us creativity. And so, what we're seeing now is the current generation of young people, especially, haven't been able to build up the skills necessary that come from those pains because they've been able to numb them at a very early age. It's almost like we took all of the light weights out of the gym. And then something like the pandemic or a big life transition comes along, which is like a giant weight. And they haven't been able to build up to it because we took the small weights out, because access to screens mean that we have phenomenal numbing ability. Now, that's again not to say that I think screens are evil, but I think it is worth bearing in mind that screens give and screens take away. They have given us access to tons of information. They have made life so much easier. There's so many television shows from even 20 years ago where plot lines just fall apart now because we have smartphones. They've given us a lot, but if we don't use them responsibly, they can also be quite detrimental. So, with all of that, as far as the reasons why and why I think it's so important, let's crack on and look at what we can actually do about it. And I think one of the core principles that I apply to most things in life, and I stole this from a university professor unashamedly, and I will just keep using it. A university professor once told me, one of the best things we can do in life is learn to process intellectually what we're doing intuitively. That is, we can give language and framework to concepts because we run a lot of life intuitively. Intuitively, we might have already figured out, wow, I numb a lot. Wow, I really don't like being lonely. Wow, I can't stand boredom. We might have intuitively figured that out. But once we can put language to it and framework, then we can take it external. We can take it from outside of us with language, share it with other people, and learn to refine it. And as far as building resilient skills, a huge amount of importance really does come from being able to provide language. And so we've already talked a little bit about the language in defining resilience, the idea of getting back up when we stumble. But some work was done by a very clever man, a Dr. Wong, who wrote an extensive paper and broke resilience down into some components, basically a taxonomy of resilience. And I think this is absolutely brilliant because the term resilience by itself is a little bit too overarching. It's a little too much. It's a little hard to look at someone and just use that one term to rate them, to look at someone and say, you're resilient or you're not resilient. As an example, one of the articles that I was reading on resilience, a man who wrote it talked about his son as an example. He said his son was 16 years old, and his son really wanted to go to a music festival. And the father agreed. He said, "All right, you're 16. This will be your big birthday present." They were in the UK, so they did. This father took his son to this massive music festival, and the father said it was miserable. He said it rained the whole time. Said it was a festival of 20,000 people with 4 toilets. He said every morning we woke up in a soggy tent, basically living in a puddle. And he said, the father said, I was in the military and nothing we did was ever this harsh. And he looked at his son, who was just having the time of his life. His son was so excited to see his favorite bands that he thought, oh my gosh, I'm living the dream. And the father was so proud. He looked at his son and he said, my son is resilient. Look, he's putting up with discomfort. He's putting up with all this difficulty in order to achieve what he wants. My son is very resilient. He said 2 weeks after this trip, he got a lower mark on a paper, which affected a whole class grade. And he was so depressed that he locked himself in his room and would barely talk to anyone for about a week and a half. The father said, maybe my son is not so resilient. All it took was a low mark on a paper, and he's become antisocial. And this is the complexity of humans, is that resilience is actually a pretty dynamic thing. There are different types of resilience. His son could live with waking up in a puddle and sharing 4 toilets with 20,000 people, but his son didn't know how to deal with failure very well. And so resilience is more of a complex idea than we think. That's why I think it's very helpful in keeping with the theme of processing intellectually what we do intuitively to be able to break resilience down. Because if we break it down into components, we can measure those components individually, and then we can take steps to fill in gaps where we have them in each unique part. So, thanks to the marvelous work of Dr. Wong, here are 5 main components of resilience that I think have declined in various ways because of screens, because of things like the pandemic and change, lots of sociological reasons. But if we identify them, we can work on them individually, and we'll talk a little bit about ways we can do that. So, the first type of resilience is cognitive resilience. And cognitive resilience is our ability to interpret and negotiate events. It's basically planning ahead. So if we use our overall imagery of walking along the path of life, your cognitive resilience is what enables you to look ahead and say, ooh, it gets rocky up ahead. So I'm going to slow down now so that I have a less of a chance of tripping and falling ahead. Cognitive resilience is what says, I have a big test coming up next Friday. I will start studying now. So obviously, young people have cognitive resilience in buckets. They're full of it because we all know young people definitely will start studying as far ahead as possible, except that that isn't the case. And in many ways, cognitive resilience is something learned. And it's something that if we don't do, it actually can cause quite a lot of stress. And sometimes we mislabel stress as anxiety. If you haven't prepared for a test and you're feeling upset about it, that's stress. That is, stress has a pointed object. Anxiety is quite general. So resilience has a lot to do with reducing anxiety. Cognitive resilience is one of the most pointed examples of that. Instead of saying, I feel anxious about test taking, what we might be saying is, I have not exercised cognitive resilience. I have not planned ahead. So I am stressed about this test. If it has a definite object, it's less anxious and it's more stress. And when we know what stresses us, we can take steps to reduce that stress. Cognitive resilience is our ability to plan ahead. It reduces stress and keeps us from anxiety. The next type of resilience is behavioral resilience. And behavioral resilience are the habits that we employ to overcome difficulty. It's basically how we soothe ourselves. So, again, going back to our imagery, if you're walking along the path of life and you do happen to stumble and fall, behavioral resilience is your ability to say, it looks like I've cut my knee, I've fallen, I've cut my knee, I'm bleeding. I'm going to go ahead and bandage this up before I move on. That's behavioral resilience. One of my good friends, he works in a hospital. His job is very stressful. And he says that on his way home, if he's had a really stressful day, he will stop at a park and go for a half-hour jog before he even gets to the house, because he says, otherwise, I'm going to bring that stress home and probably yell at my family. So his behavioral resilience is that he knows if he jogs, it's going to relieve some of that stress. For some people, behavioral resilience is being able to get away to a quiet place and read a book. For some people, it's being able to find a friend to talk to. Whatever it is, behavioral resilience is our ability to take care of ourselves, to soothe in those moments where we do inevitably stumble and fall. It's taking the time to bandage up a wound before we get back up and start walking again. All right, our next type of resilience is motivational resilience. Motivational resilience is our driving purpose. It's what compels us to keep going. So motivational resilience is basically what we're on the path for. A very quick check for good, if you want a very easy way to do a quick measure of sort of your mental positivity and health. If you're able to name something that you're looking forward to in the coming days, something you're looking forward to in the coming months, and something you're looking forward to in the coming years, that gives you short, medium, and long-term measure of motivational resilience. What is getting you through? And perhaps it is. Maybe, I mean, what day are we on? It's Tuesday, I think. That sounds good. I'd bump around a lot. I think it's Tuesday. We'll go with Tuesday. Maybe your short-term motivational resilience is just getting through the week. Maybe you're just excited for a weekend. Maybe your medium-term resilience is you have a friend that you're going to get to visit or is coming to see you. Maybe your long-term motivation is securing enough financial stability to be able to be comfortable as you get older. Whatever it is, being able to name a short, medium, and long-term thing you're looking forward to is a great way to gauge your motivational resilience. It's why we get back up. Motivational resilience is what, when we fall down, says, I got to get back up because I'm walking towards this. And if we don't have something to walk toward, it can really be a devastating effect. This is something I think we saw a lot of decline in during the pandemic, because a lot of things that young people looked forward to that were absolutely certain, everything from graduation ceremonies to the experience of getting to be a new college freshman, a lot of that was wiped away. Suddenly, education switched to being online, ceremonies couldn't be held. And so things people were looking forward to were ripped away. And we saw a massive decline in people's motivational resilience. In order to be mentally, emotionally, and socially healthy, we need to have something that will get us back up, something we're moving toward. The next type of resilience is our relational resilience. Relational resilience is the support network of people that we have in place to help us with difficulty. And this goes two ways. Relational resilience, going back to our imagery, is when you stumble and fall, being able to have the confidence and strength to ask for help, being able to stumble and fall and reach out your hand and say, I need help getting back up. It is also our ability to recognize when other people need help. So empathy ties in quite a lot to relational resilience. And empathy is a whole other topic that we could talk about for quite a long time, but I won't because we have limited time today. But empathy is on the decline in society as well. And because of that, we've seen quite a bit of decline in our relational resilience. People are less able to ask for help and less able to recognize when other people need help. And this relational resilience is quite important because humans are social creatures. We are built in such a way that we work best. We have herd mentality. When we're alone, we're actually quite unhealthy. And remember, we can use screens now to numb that feeling of loneliness. The problem is that doesn't really address it. People who feel lonely, people who have stumbled and don't have anyone to help them get back up, I mean, I picture the image of someone stumbling on a path and just lying there on the ground scrolling through their phone. It'll distract them. They can look at other people's lives, and that's just it. You can numb loneliness by watching the social media feeds of loads of other people, but that's not actually going to help you get back up. We need interdependent, meaningful relationships to keep a support network healthy. That means that we're able to ask for help and we're able to offer help. And that's an important part of our resilience skill set. And then finally, probably the most difficult one is our emotional resilience, which is our ability to tolerate and even learn from negative feelings and events. And this one really has taken a big dip. And part of the reason that I believe that it has taken such a big dip is because we are marketing the idea that we should be happy all of the time. A lot of our commercial and social media influence tells us we deserve to be happy all the time. And if you're not happy all the time, something is horribly wrong and you probably need a new drug or something. That's not actually how the human experience works. We have a whole ton of emotions. If we didn't, we wouldn't have near as good a music. We love being able to listen to music that talks about heartbreak and sorrow because those are things we experience, not forever. And the truth about emotion is that every single emotion is temporary. Every single one. The good ones, the bad ones, they are all temporary. They're fleeting. And so our ability to tolerate negative emotions is really our ability to put things in perspective of time, to be able to say, I may be in pain now, but I know this won't last forever, so I will survive it. A very interesting fact is that our brains basically stop our time circuitry when we're in pain. And this happens for really good reason. For physical pain, it makes a lot of sense. If you got a giant gaping wound, cut on your leg, that is not the time to think, did I feed the cats? No, 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 no. If you have a giant wound on your leg, that is the time to take care of a giant wound on your leg. And to ensure this, your brain basically cuts off all the time circuitry so that in pain, we feel like that's eternity. In fact, if you look at emotional pain like loneliness or depression, half of the pain is feeling isolated or hopeless. But a good half of the pain is actually from the fear that this is just how it will always be. And so that cutoff is helpful physically, but actually quite difficult emotionally. So emotional resilience is the discipline of reconnecting that time circuitry, of being able to say, yes, I feel lonely or depressed or tired or hungry or hot or what have you right now, but I know it won't last. And so I will get through this. In fact, I might even learn from it. I might realize, ooh, it's quite cold outside. I can survive this cold, but next time I'll employ some cognitive resilience and bring a jacket. Or it could be in social situations. The pain of embarrassment may teach us, yeah, this is horrible and embarrassing, but this won't last forever. I will get through it, and I will know how to act better next time. But the problem is that our emotional resilience has been deeply strained because at this point, we are marketed the idea that we must be happy all the time. And if we're not happy, something's wrong. That's very disconnected with the idea that unhappiness and discomfort is just going to happen. And we've sort of idolized victimhood a little bit as another way to kind of dim some emotional resilience. But we do need that emotional resilience, that ability to reconnect the time circuitry and say, I can survive this. I will get through this. So, a fun exercise to do is actually to take all of these different types of resilience and rate yourself. And I won't make you do it right now, but I would recommend you write these down, and then at some point in the future, rate yourself. I like a 1 to 7 scale, just because I quite like the ability to be in the middle, and 1 to 7 allows you to do that. But rate yourself on 1 to 7 for each of these. 1 being, oh, I'm terrible at this, and 7 being, I could teach a class on this. And that way, you sort of get to map out your own resilient abilities and then review that over a week. Because sometimes we do tend to rate ourselves more on ideal and less on reality. But over a week, if you realize, wow, I'm actually really good at planning ahead, that is a phenomenal skill to have. That is a bit of resilience that you are excelling in. But perhaps over a week, you realize, I don't ask for help very well. So maybe you rank lower on relational resilience. Being able to assess yourself or the students you work with or your coworkers, being able to do this is incredibly helpful because it helps us pinpoint. Because resilience is way too broad to just throw that term around and say someone is resilient or they are not. Actually, there are quite a few components to it. And the more we can get into these specific components, the better. Now, as far as what we do, now that we've broken down the language and we've talked about some of the causes, let's talk just a little bit about what it is that we do to increase our resilience. And at this point, I want to share this fun little graphic with you to give you a little bit of hope. And that is a very funny thing about humans is that for us to be most satisfied in life, we actually need a healthy amount of adversity. We know that too much adversity can be very damaging. That's well documented. We know that too much adversity, whether that comes from socioeconomic factors, instability, lack of safety, too much transition, too much difficulty, and we do not do well. We can be overwhelmed. What we often forget, but there are lovely studies that back this up, is that too little adversity is actually just as damaging. And so when we're trying to build up our resilience, we're actually doing something incredibly healthy for us by introducing some measurable adversity in the areas that we need. So looking back at those list of different kinds of resilience, being able to add in things that force you to grow those skills is actually going to increase our satisfaction in life. Because if we have low resilience skills, it may mean that either we're overwhelmed on that side of the scale and just not addressing it, or we have too little adversity and we just haven't had to flex that muscle. So building up that muscle is going to be incredibly important. And the reality is, building resilience really is like building muscle. And that's a really difficult thing to swallow because I would be so rich if I could just tell you a quick, surefire way to just suddenly build resilience. If I cracked that, I would be set for life. I don't think anyone's going to crack it because building resilience really is like building muscle. It takes measurable difficulty. The way muscle builds is actually due to small amounts of damage. If you lift a weight that's just a bit heavier than your muscles actually have capacity for, your muscles will strain. You'll actually tear some of the muscle fiber. And when that muscle fiber heals up, it'll have basically scar tissue, which really just becomes more muscle. And so adding small measurable difficulty is how you build muscle. You start, with a 5 kilo weight, and then you move up to a 10 kilo weight, and then a 15 kilo weight. And what you're doing is you're stressing your muscle just slightly enough to cause a little bit of damage, which heals over and creates more muscle. Building resilience is exactly the same way. The only way to build resilience is to add measurably increasing difficulty and then adapting to it. Now, it's very important to note that it does need to be smartly measuring difficulty. It doesn't mean, start out at a 200 kilo weight. Don't do that. That's going to be exhausting. If you don't plan ahead well, then suddenly throwing yourself into a situation where everything is dependent on you having meticulous plans, you're going to stress yourself out. So we need to add in small measures. We need to add in small ways in order to build up our muscles. And there are a few different ways we can do this. I think the concept of a medieval gym is one that I actually really, really like as far as how we can do this. So come with me on a little imaginary trip very quickly, if you will. If you stepped into a time machine and you took that time machine back to medieval England and you stepped out of that time machine and you saw a whole bunch of peasants working the field and you said, hello, peasants, I'm going to open a gym. The peasants would say, you're going to what now? And you would say, let me explain. We're going to have treadmills where you can run and go nowhere. And I'm pretty sure they would look at you and say, no, thank you. If I run, it's because I need to get somewhere. I wouldn't do that for no good reason. And you'd say, okay, it gets better. I'm going to give you a bunch of heavy objects that you can lift and then put right back down. And I'm sure at that point they would try to burn you as a witch because that's absolutely insane. Because for them, they had so much physical exertion just to stay alive that the idea of extra physical exertion for the sake of itself would be absolutely ludicrous. However, we most certainly do have gyms now. And part of the reason for that is that we technologically moved on from physical exertion being tied so closely to our survival for much of the world. What that means is we still need physical exertion to be healthy. So we've created an intentional inefficiency to add it back in. The gym is the most poignant example of an intentional inefficiency. It really is running and going nowhere and picking up heavy objects and putting them right back down. It's about as inefficient as it gets. And we pay money for it because we need to add back in something that we technologically moved past. Now, I already mentioned things like screens and stuff like that. The idea is, I think we've technologically moved past a lot of the things that build resilience. So now we're going to have to add some intentional inefficiencies. And ultimately, I think that's the framework that's going to provide that measurable bit of difficulty we need to increase our resilience in different ways. And so for me, I love this concept. I love the idea of building our resilience through building intentional inefficiencies. And this looks different for each of those different ways. It could well mean for relational resilience, if you need to build that up, it might mean voluntarily putting yourself in a vulnerable position to accomplish something that you can't accomplish on your own. And that could well mean that maybe instead of you being able to drive yourself to the grocery store, you run an experiment where you see what it would be like if you needed to ride with someone else to the grocery store. It sounds ridiculous. It's incredibly inefficient. You could have done that by yourself. But if you learn to do little measurable things like that, asking for help is going to become easier because you will survive someone giving you a trip to the grocery store. And if you survive it, you've built a little bit of muscle and you might be able to survive something even more. And so building in these small intentional inefficiencies, I think is going to be a huge way that we're going to make a difference. I'll give you some examples on how I've seen this done. When I was a small child, learning to tie my shoe, my my mother would add 15 minutes to our departure time. If we needed to be out the door at 8 o'clock, she would say at 7:45, "All right, it's time to go," because she knew I was going to fumble for 15 minutes trying to get my shoes tied. My poor dad did not get this memo, and so at 8 o'clock, he would say, "Right, it's time to go." And there wasn't enough time, and I would fumble, so he would just tie my shoes for me. So one way to build intentional inefficiencies is actually to build in more time, to build in more time to allow us to do things in a harder way. One of the reasons that we don't do intentional inefficiencies is we're so pressed for time now. We prioritize efficiency, but in all honesty, if you're going to build some resilience, it's going to take time. So we need to build into our schedules more time. If we're designing curriculum for kids, what difficulty could we add in and then allow some more time for it? It's no good, for instance, taking away their calculators and expecting them to do the same math test in the same amount of time. If you took away the calculators, that's an intentional inefficiency. It makes us have to remember basic arithmetic, but if you expect it at a calculator speed, it's just going to frustrate everyone. So adding more time is a great way to build a case for intentional inefficiencies. I've also seen it done through incentivizing. An example where they didn't even intend it, I don't think, was the road system in California. I was driving with a friend of mine on the 405 north of Los Angeles. And we were in the carpool lane because if you have two people in a car, you get to a special lane just for you. And we're cruising along at 60 miles an hour. And next to us were 4 lanes of standstill traffic. That means 4 lanes were clogged with people alone in their cars. But because I was in a car sharing space with another person, I got to go fast. Now, I doubt that the California Department of Transportation was intentionally trying to incentivize community, but that's precisely what they were doing. They basically incentivized if you will share space with someone, you get to go faster. And so building in some incentivizing by basically creating slowdowns in order to push people into more intentional, inefficient, or interactive behavior is another great way to do it. An example I saw from a school, one teacher, and it's very important to point out that this in no way is what I'm advocating everybody do. It's just an example for one school. One teacher realized that all of the students' assignments were very easy to find. Everything was online, so a student just had to log in. They would see what was assigned, when it was due. Everything was gorgeously efficient. And so he said, I'm going to create an intentional efficiency, and for the next month, I will only give assignments verbally. And so he didn't post anything online. Now, that did create quite a bit of a bottleneck, but it bottlenecked with him. And he said that because of that month, he got to know his students far better than he had for the entire rest of the school year, because they had to be present to hear what the assignments were. It even increased the camaraderie between the students, because if someone missed a class, they would have to ask another student what the assignment was. They weren't able to just use technology by themselves. They had to become dependent on other people. Now, not saying that's a long-term solution. I'm sure if schools have put in place a load of technological solutions, the last thing they want is someone on a webinar saying, don't use technology. So that is not a catch-all, but it could well be something that we use at a time. On a very simple personal level, even just monitoring our use of phones. One thing we can do to build our resilience as far as getting back to that pain of boredom. I do this from time to time when I'm standing in line in an airport, even though everything within me wants to take out my phone. I don't. I build 10 minutes where I say, for 10 minutes, just going to stand here. And I probably look like a crazy person, because if we see anyone standing around not on a phone now, we think something must be wrong. But that's teaching me a little bit of an intentional inefficiency. I'm forcing myself to be creative. Some of my best ideas come from that. So I really do think building these intentional inefficiencies is a framework that's going to help. And it's going to help because it's tied to hope. I close most of my presentations tying to hope because I think it's very important. And one of the great things about resilience is that it is contagious. We are more resilient when we are connected to resilient people. If we fall down ourselves, but see everyone else around us getting up, we are far more inclined to get up. If we fall down and see everyone else just lying around on the ground, we're way more likely to just lie on the ground. And so by increasing our resilience, we're increasing the conduits where hope can flow. And it ties into my favorite quote that I'm going to leave you with, because it's a great quote and I just want to share it everywhere. And it is this, that our gift to the world around us is hope. And it's not a blind hope that pretends everything is fine when clearly it's not, but it's the kind of hope that comes from staring pain and suffering right in the eyes and refuses to believe that's all there is. To me, that is another phenomenal definition of resilience, the ability to stare pain and suffering right in the eyes and refuse to believe that it's all there is. And so by being more resilient, we genuinely are helping other people be more resilient. By breaking resilience down into its components, we can more accurately measure the individual parts. And by creating intentional inefficiencies for those individual parts, we're able to increase a skill set that I genuinely think is on the decline, but is desperately, desperately needed. So I'll give you, there's a quick snapshot of, if you're interested in further reading, there's some of those. I'm sure we can email them to you as well. There's lots of really good work on it. These are just a few little segments that I wanted to highlight. And and I think I've even managed to end in time for some Q&A, which I'm very proud of, because I'm not always the most concise. But thank you so much for listening. I enjoy getting to speak about this.
That was amazing, Chris. Resilience is such a big a skill and topic for me, and I got so many takeaways. While I'm sharing mine, does anybody want to put in the chat or even unmute yourself and ask Chris, or even just share your takeaways with us? I do not want to hijack this. It was great. Anybody want to share their takeaways? I'm just so grateful that you taught us. Oh, yes, Dibajoti, please unmute yourself, ask.
Hi, Mr. Chris. Hi, Meena. Yeah, so a wonderful session. What's my takeaway from here is that one of the key points that you have highlighted is that we see resilience as a very broad term, or maybe we don't realize that it's a very broad term. You give great examples of the scenarios where the father applauded the child, saying that, see, my child is working towards it. I see the potholes, trying to stay with 2,000 people, and is being resilient. But when the child scored less because of because of something which has happened a few weeks or a few days prior, the child was not able to deal with it, right? So there's a pseudo resilience, right, where the child may be able to deal with something in one aspect, but may not be able to deal with the other aspect. That led us to the various types of the resilience. So an individual can excel in one of the resilient types, but may not be able to excel in the other four, which we have, I think, discussed prior. So I think that's something that it's really great to know and good to know that you may excel in one aspect of your life, but that may not be able to save you in the other aspects of life. So as far if I'm allowed to like label it or like grade it, maybe I think that what we lack nowadays is the emotional resilience. We might plan some things for ahead. Okay, there's a party, there's some checking to be done, there's some lesson planning to be done. So cognitive resilience may be in place, behavioral resilience may be in place, but I think the motivational resilience, the emotional ones are something that we really need to work on. And the pandemic has really thrown a lot of stones at us, exposing our bare skeletons.
Yeah, I agree. I do. I think again the idea of language and framework, you know, being able to break things down into manageable chunks. Even the concept of resilience itself, breaking it down into manageable chunks. I mean, it changed the whole way I look at it. It's kind of an overwhelming term. It seems so much more approachable and so much more something we can work on when you can look at it specifically. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for voicing that. Yeah, I specifically appreciate how you broke it down for us. As you said, I've always in my mind personally just thought about resilience as you fall down, you get up. But
Yeah.
but knowing the different, if you want to say, the branches of resilience and how you can actually become more aware of what you're lacking and what you're good at, and go to the intentional inefficiencies, Jim. Yeah, that was really an absolute nugget for me personally. So thank you. I love the concept of an intentional inefficiency, which makes me want to cancel my gym contract right now.
It is funny.
But anyway, no, I'm going to keep the body going so that it can make up.
We need them. We need the intentional inefficiencies.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I just want to say thank you very much again for sharing your expertise with us. Your analogies are incredible and so vivid once you explain them. And yeah, thank you for joining us. And just a little bit about why it's so important for us as Shimanli to get this message out and to speak about these skills with our community is because we believe completely in holistic education. And the more we start building those muscles in our students and our kids, the more we'll be better adults, I guess. But as you said, life is a learning journey and it's constant. So, you know, I don't even know how to express this because it's so important to instill it in kids, but even as adults, I think it's important to carry on the learning journey, this lifelong learning journey that we're all on. So if you guys are interested in any of these skills that Shimanli incorporates into an educational system, please, by all means, go check our website. It's shimanli.com, or should I say www.shimanli.com, just in case you didn't know that one. and yeah, find out how we can collaborate and get this instilled in our kids, these skills, and also help what you shared, Chris, helps us be aware of the numbing situation that is so prevalent in our students, kids, because they were born into a world of screens. And with these screens, we are all missing out on very important skills that we need to build. And we can start with that time inefficiency, you know. Okay, so only 10 minutes here, and then we can build up and build up and build up like we're at the gym. So thank you very much. Anything you would like to last minute, anybody's? No? Okay. Thanks, Chris. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. It was a great one. And I hope to see you again very soon at our next webinar, and just have a fantastic evening.
Thank you so
Afternoon,
much, everybody.
morning.
Thank you, Chris and
Bye,
Meena. Thank you.
guys. See you.
Pleasure. Thank you.